At issue tonight, Team Canada tensions. Tariffs imposed by the U.S. and China are causing turmoil, with premiers on opposite sides of how Canada should respond.
I respect what they're doing, but there's no damn way we should drop tariffs on China, I'll tell you that.
While some premiers are calling for support for their industries.
What we're asking for today is that same respect, that same concern, that same sense of emergency.
Increasing the challenge for how Ottawa responds.
There's times to hit back and there's times to talk, and right now is the time to talk.
So are there cracks forming in Team Canada? How challenging are these tensions for the federal government? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. So this has started to bubble up probably last week, and then this week seems even more apparent as provinces try to, I suppose, rightly defend their own interests and their own trade issues. But it's also happening at the same time as these negotiations continue in Washington. What are you observing, Chantal, in terms of how the Team Canada approach has changed?
Is there still a Team Canada approach? Because over the past few days, we've seen Saskatchewan and Alberta calling for a drop on tariffs on EVs to allow canola to flow to China, while Ontario is saying, no, we need to protect the auto industry. The Premier of BC saying you need to do more, and the Premier of New Brunswick for softwood lumber, and you're paying a lot of attention to auto and not enough to us. I think what you're seeing, and I know this comes out of left field, is maybe the wisdom of Justin Trudeau's approach to the last negotiation, i.e. the creation of a kind of consultative council that brought together unions, various players from around the country, which he did leave behind, but I don't think has been activated by Mark Carney. What did these people accomplish? They kind of got to talk or act as bridges to all these conflicting interests so that Canadian governments were not negotiating with each other. And at this point, that is where this is going.
And division is probably partly what certainly China is after, and perhaps the United States as well, Andrew.
Yes, there's a reason China chose canola. It was deliberately designed to prey upon our internal divisions. And I do think there's a danger of kind of jumping to China's tune here. There's no logical reason why tariffs on EVs and tariffs on canola should be linked. It's China that's made that linkage. And if we do follow the logic of that and do what China demands of us, we've no assurance that we'll actually get any permanent peace with China any more than we will with Trump. With both of these people, these countries, these regimes, we're dealing with the issue that after they finished blackmailing us, they may just come back and blackmail us some more. Yeah. So I think it's probably best if we looked at these things, I know this is hard to say to a politician, and looked at them in isolation. Does it make sense on its own merits to be tariffing EVs, Chinese EVs? It's complicated. If it was just a matter of trying to protect our industry, and if it was just part of that general attempt by the previous government to shoehorn the whole industry into EVs, I'd say no. If you're looking at it through a broader lens of security, where what you're trying to do is to keep China from establishing global dominance in this industry, that's a more complicated question. But simply looking at it as a trade-off of one region for another, I think that really goes down a really bad road for the country as a whole, and particularly for our internal divisions.
The problem, I guess, Althia, is that premiers do have to defend their industries and look as though they're standing up for their workers and the people in their provinces, and that leads us with them sort of working in opposite directions in some cases.
Absolutely. That is their job. I think they're also being more vocal about it because the Prime Minister has not taken up the stage. So, there's been a lot of talk from Mr. Carney about the negotiations, but self-imposed deadlines have been missed twice. There have been things that the federal government has negotiated away with nothing back in return. And there's no sense that that there is a really emboldened action coming from the federal government. So they all know that there are negotiations underway as we speak in Washington, and they want to plead their case. And so they're doing so publicly, because at the very least, let's say there is a deal done next week and it's not what they want, they will be able to say, I advocated on your behalf. Yeah. I think what's more concerning, frankly, is what Canada is willing to trade away for temporary peace. Because we have to Andrew's point, no indication that Donald Trump will keep his word. So if we are willing to trade away, we've seen reports about supply management, for example. I don't want to get into a discussion about supply management, but if we're willing to trade away certain key things, what will be left when we actually want to discuss CUSMA? Mm-hmm. And those, I think, are the bigger issues here.
Sure. Chantal?
And that was the point about having a bigger tent that included Brian Mulroney and the unions and people who actually speak to diverse interests in this country, to haggle this out here rather than in public. And that is not happening. People are being kept in the dark. It's not the same thing to say we're going to brief premiers at some point on what's happening. But if you want them to be having that negotiation in public, you are going to come with a weaker hand to any negotiation, because they are going to be defending, as they should, their own province's interest. And at this point, Mark Carney is failing to give them a national purpose or sustain the national purpose that was there when he took office.
I do wonder, Andrew, how much sort of the vacuum of information, like the lack of information for the premiers about where the negotiations are at, which might be needed, I don't know, but I do wonder whether that is also contributing to the problem. You know, if they're close to a deal, what's on the table, what is the broader strategy? Maybe that's making things worse not knowing.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with the premiers advocating for their province's interests and complaining, if you will, that if they think those interests are being overlooked, as long as they're not trying to negotiate themselves or intrude themselves overly much into the proper jurisdiction of the federal government. But as you and as Chantal have said, if the feds want them to be quieter, they're going to have to give them something to do so. And it may be simply sharing information. It may be something grubbier than that. But they can't just simply order them to shush. And usually it's better when you take people into their confidence, into your confidence, if you want them to be team players.
Althia?
I think one of the things that seems very odd in this round of negotiations is it feels like a sense of panic. And I say this just from like the buzz around the capital, our capital, like Canadian capital. The last time around, in the lead up to CUSMA, we knew what the negotiation strategy was. Well, maybe at the time we didn't realize that the Canadian government wanted to kick the can down the road until the deadline was coming up to deadline point, and Donald Trump would have to agree with what was being discussed. But we knew we were making inroads with American legislators and American businessmen and getting them to lobby on our behalf. That strategy is not working. The Canadian government has set that aside. But what is the new strategy? Because it seems like they themselves keep changing their strategy. Every few weeks, months, they're in a new approach. So that is also what is leading, I think, to confusion with business leaders, with the premiers, with other people whose livelihood depend on what happens next. And there is not much, are we really just going after temporary side deals, or are these going to be permanent side deals that are supposed to stick beyond CUSMA? There needs to be more communication, frankly, because otherwise you'll have more and more people speaking out.
Andrew,
and we have to change the game. We're not going to keep Stellantis, for example, here by throwing subsidies at them, and we're certainly not going to keep them by threatening them with lawsuits. The only way you're going to get investment to locate in a permanent way in the country is if we're such an attractive destination for investment that they'll do so even in the face of whatever Donald Trump throws at them. So we've got to be thinking about a much larger game of how do we make ourselves so attractive as a location for investment that we're not having to basically fight with one arm tied behind our back. We can't fight the Americans on tariffs. We can't fight them on subsidies. We can fight them on overall competitiveness.
I mean, I presumably that's what Mark Carney says he's trying to do as well. You know, whether it's working or not, I don't know. But last 32, Chantal.
Okay, two things. On the auto industry front, we do have two advantages that no American administration can take away. The dollar is lower, and healthcare. If you're going to negotiate work contracts and invest somewhere, it's a lot less costly to do so in Canada. These have been advantages we've had for decades. As for what the strategy is, I agree with the sense of panic, but I also think that this is a government that is now becoming more political than policy-oriented, and what they're trying to get is a win, any win, before, as soon as possible, and ideally before the budget.
Okay, we're
And
going to
if
leave that
it's
part
not
of the
necessarily a win. You know, like that's the thing.
Something
that
something.
looks like
Yeah.
Something that's not a loss.
I did say this was about politics and not about policy.
At issue, bail reform. The Liberals are making big changes to Canada's bail system, including tougher sentences for repeat offenders and reversing the onus on bail decisions.
We're fixing ineffective policies from the past and building a stronger, safer future with tough new laws, big new resources, and practical solutions.
While the Conservatives are accusing the Liberals of rehashing previous legislation.
We don't need Mr. Carney to simply repeat more Liberal promises on reverse onus. We need to scrap Liberal bail.
So what's been made of the changes the Liberals are proposing? How do they match up with the many calls for reform? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Althia, I'll start with you. We will see, obviously, the full piece of legislation next week, but these are some key measures the Liberals put forward. How do they align with sort of what the complaints were and what the Conservatives have been asking for?
It's interesting that Mr. Poilievre said that, because he should have just accused them of plagiarism. Reverse onus is actually one of his own MP's bills that is part of the Conservatives' concerted effort to put crime at the top of the public agenda. These are mostly promises that the Liberals had made that, frankly, they lifted from the Conservatives, because the Conservatives were very good at convincing the country, a bit like on the carbon price, that the major issue is a small number of exceptional cases where we have violent repeat offenders who have been let go on bail and have reoffended for a variety of reasons. I don't know that what will be tabled or what we expect to be tabled, what Mr. Carney said today, will really make a dent in the problem, because a lot of it is actually resource driven. We don't have enough crowns. There's not enough room in jails. There's not enough information sharing across the country. A lot of the problems are the fact that you don't have a complete picture of the accused in front of you. So you don't know that they have all these other charges in British Columbia, say, when you're hearing about them in Toronto. So there's a lot of things that the government could bring forward. There's a lot of they could talk about, and Mr. Carney did, to his credit, today when he talked about mental health and addiction services. The Justice Minister is meeting with his provincial counterparts. I'm told that there is not going to be federal dollars attached to that, but maybe there will be, because when you think about it, and I think it's worth saying this and reminding people, we are incarcerating at the moment about 80% of people who are in jail are either awaiting their trial or they are waiting for their bail hearing. And about half of people who have their case heard are actually found to not be guilty. So you can't put everybody in jail. First of all, we don't have the space for all of these people. And we cannot make laws for the exceptions, because so many people are actually innocent.
Chantal.
Okay, so I'm going to do the cynical thing here. If I were thinking that maybe I'm going to be in an election sooner rather than later, and I were a minority government, I would be slowly but surely taking leaves out of the Conservative playbook so that they can't play with it.
Yeah.
And on substance, there are so many reasons why this announcement needs sustained policy effort that I'm not sure that I'm going to see, that I have to conclude that it came up very early. on a week where there were many other priorities as some kind of a life insurance in case of an election.
Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the last election campaign when both parties actually moved towards each other. They both dropped policies that they thought were losers for them politically. So the Conservatives dropped their opposition to subsidies to the media, and the Liberals adopted basically conservative bail and sentencing policies. As Althia mentioned, you know, in Ontario, something like 80% of the prison population are people who are on remand. They're awaiting trial. They've not been convicted of anything that they've been accused of. That's higher than in the United States. It's 3 times as high as in the UK or France. So we've already done it for murderers. We've done it for sexual offenders. Now I think we're going to do it for like car theft. Are we going to get to 90%? Are we going to get to 90%? At what point do you say, what's happened to the presumption of innocence? I know it's great politics, I know, but it certainly again shows if you thought Mark Carney was going to be the high-minded technocrat who would, just do what was right for the country, I think he's showing a very, very long political streak.
Last 20 seconds to you there, Althia.
The government, I don't think this is coming last minute. Like, they have been consulting on this throughout the summer. I'm actually surprised that it took this long for the legislation to be tabled, but I agree that they are trying to squeeze the Conservatives and basically be just as tough, like take away another issue that the Conservatives have. And frankly, it's also kind of a reminder to a lot of the backbench in Mr. Poilievre's caucus that maybe the leader that you have is not the leader that you want for a whole bunch of other reasons that I know we'll talk about in the next block or on the podcast if people are watching on TV.
Look at you. You're doing the throws for me now. That's good. I've trained you well. At issue, Pierre Poilievre accuses the RCMP of protecting Justin Trudeau's Liberal government from prosecution in the past.
If the RCMP had been doing its job and not covering up for him, then he would have been criminally charged.
An accusation rejected by the commissioner of the RCMP.
It was clear that there's no interference. I don't take any orders from any political individual.
So what's been made of Pierre Poilievre's comments against the RCMP? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. So on top of this, then, the Pierre Poilievre's office made a series of comments about this and specifically also said that he wasn't talking about the current commissioner. He was talking about a previous commissioner, given that this all happened some time ago. It's kind of a curious thing to be talking about, a curious way to target the National Police Force. I'm not sure I fully understand why he's going after sort of old news. Chantal?
And it's the second time in 2 weeks that Pierre Poilievre, an aspiring prime minister, is casting doubts as to how the rule of law is applied in this country. This was one, but the other was tweets about the sentences imposed on the people responsible for the Ottawa convoy, the truckers' occupation of downtown Ottawa. And in both cases, it basically led to the conclusion that the leader of the official opposition doesn't believe that Canada's justice system is operating or that it's not under undue influence. That is a very dangerous slope. You only need to see what's happening south of the border to figure it out. And it's a slippery slope for Mr. Poilievre. And why do I say that? Not because of his leadership review, but because there are MPs in this caucus who are growing increasingly uncomfortable with those types of comments.
Althia, what do you make of what he was trying to get at here?
I don't know. And I have so many messages from Conservatives asking me what I think he's trying to get at. Right. They don't understand it either, frankly. I think there's a few different scenarios that you can see this through. I will say that it is, rather shocking for a party leader that was so tired of the Trump comparisons to basically be barring his language, suggesting that his political opponent should have been put in jail, that the cops are not doing their job because of political reasons. And to add to Chantal's list from earlier in the week, he was also attacking DEI policies. Either he is very worried about the leadership review and is looking to mobilize support, which I find really hard to believe, or he's trying to flush out his critics, which could very well be the case, because Chantal is right. There are a number of caucus members, and I feel like the list is growing, who are wondering what is going on. Because these clips, there will be an election, and they're going to be used by the Liberals. There is no doubt about it. So I think you could see it that way, or maybe he's just trying to, frankly, test them to see whether or not they are going to try to mount an opposition against him.
Yeah.
Some have talked about it, but I have not thought it was going to happen. But with more and more behavior like this, I don't know. Maybe the weeks ahead will be far more interesting than we thought.
Or he just believes this, or these are things that he thinks and believes. I mean, that's the other possibility, right? Like less strategic, but that could be it as well.
You're right, but the risk that he's taking is not that there will be a caucus revolt, it's that some of his caucus members will cross the floor and find that they have
on their
more
own,
conservative.
like Chuck Strahl and company against Stockwell Day.
Yes, that is how Stockwell Day went down, because he made comments about judges.
That's right. Andrew?
I want to be careful. There is a legitimate question about whether crimes were committed in the SNC-Lavalin affair. It was certainly contrary to all the conventions of the separation of powers. It was certainly found to be in contravention of the ethics code. There's also historically been some reason to doubt just how entirely independent the RCMP has been of political power. And there were questions raised about how well was how able was the RCMP to actually pursue this investigation when they couldn't get cabinet conferences, couldn't get people to talk to them, et cetera. All of that is a long way from the leader of the opposition definitively stating the Prime Minister is guilty of crimes, the RCMP is covering up for them, they're despicable, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a real question of judgment here, quite apart from the legitimate issues that underlie it. And it is, once again, he seems to be auditioning for the role of the opposition leader rather than for the Prime Minister. So it's not to say that there aren't some questions that can be legitimately asked, but if you're going to make those kinds of statements, you better have the evidence to back it up.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you all. Good to see you. That's At Issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for watching.